All right, ready to dive into some really fascinating Irish history.
Absolutely, yeah.
We're talking plantations, which, and I will say your notes are. This is like seriously in-depth stuff.
Oh, yeah.
But we're going to unpack all of that. 16th, 17th century Ireland, massive land upheaval.
It's really a fascinating period because you see, I mean, it's really reshaping the entire fabric of Irish society.
Yeah,
And not just in terms of who owns the land, but,
right.
power, identity, clash of cultures.
Totally. And that's what we're gonna pinpoint, like the key events.
Yeah.
Like what was motivating the people who were involved in this, and what are the ripples that we're still dealing with today?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, these are legacies that touch upon, as you said, land ownership patterns, but also cultural identity, even the political landscape to this day.
Huge. Yeah, it's all connected.
Yeah.
So to even begin to like wrap our heads around this whole plantation situation,
Yeah.
we got to rewind a bit, even before the Tudors, right?
Okay.
So imagine Ireland, not like this unified, English under English rule, but
Yeah.
but like a patchwork of all these different systems.
Right, precisely. So you have the Pale, which is, this little mini England
Yeah.
clustered around Dublin. But then you go beyond that, you have these Anglo-Norman territories
Right.
ruled by families like, the Fitzgeralds who'd come over, centuries earlier.
Yeah.
They'd carved out their own domains. And what's interesting is they started to weave themselves into the existing, Gaelic fabric.
Yeah, it's like this tapestry with all these different threads.
Absolutely.
And you've got figures like Gerald Fitzmaurice,
Right.
who the Earl of Desmond, who he was. This guy was more comfortable like speaking Irish
Right.
and like navigating all of the Gaelic customs.
It really challenges this kind of, simple narrative of us versus them, right?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, here's this Anglo-Norman nobleman, but so embedded in Irish culture.
Yeah, he defies categorization a little bit.
He does.
But it's this blending, particularly when it comes to land.
Yes.
That sets up, some of the conflict here.
Yeah.
Right? Because you have English common law, which is all about individual ownership, primogeniture.
Right.
Eldest son gets everything.
Exactly.
And then you got Brehon law.
Yeah. Right, which is operating on completely different principles.
Totally different.
It's communal. It belongs to the clan.
Right.
Succession isn't about bloodlines. It's about, a council, a derb fine, electing the most capable leader.
Wow. So trying to impose one on the other, I imagine, didn't go so smoothly.
A recipe for some friction, you could say.
Yeah.
And it's this tension over land, over law.
Right.
Who has the right to what? That really forms the bedrock, upon which the plantations unfold.
Right. It's like this underlying
Yes.
fault line
Exactly.
that's about to blow. And to the Tudors, specifically Henry VII,
Right.
first Tudor king, inherits this whole messy situation.
Yes.
And he's like, I need to get control of this.
Yeah.
But he's got this one thorn in his side.
Yeah.
Garrett Moore Fitzgerald,
Oh.
the Earl of Kildare.
Yes.
Ogiaca, the uncrowned king of Ireland.
A fascinating figure.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, he had maneuvered himself into such a position of power, married into the right families, or really holding, the reins of Irish politics.
Yeah.
But
That he'd backed the wrong horse, right?
he had backed the losing side in the War of the Roses.
Exactly. So Henry's looking at this guy thinking,
Yeah.
dangerous, too powerful.
Powerful and potentially disloyal. Dangerous combination.
Exactly.
So Henry has to assert control.
Yeah.
And this is where Poyning's law comes in.
Poyning's law, right? Which essentially was the Tudor way of being like, yeah, Irish Parliament, we're going to clip your wings a little bit.
Exactly. Curtail their power.
Yeah.
Restrict their ability to act independently of the English crown.
Major power move.
It was.
But he does eventually, he brings Garrett Moore back into the fold.
Right.
But it always seemed like this very tenuous,
It's an uneasy truce, very much so.
uneasy truce.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the plot thickens because then you have Henry VIII,
Of course, yes.
who needs no introduction.
Right.
He takes the throne, and things get even more interesting for Ireland, let's just say.
Right, right.
And so he decides to kind of ramp up his dad's, let's get these Irish lords in line.
Yeah.
And he does it through this policy called surrender and regrant.
Right, which on the surface sounds
Wow.
like a fairly amicable arrangement.
Right.
Irish lords surrender your land to the crown, will, grant it back to you.
Right.
You get these fancy English titles. Prestige, protection, what could go wrong?
Almost too good to be true.
Almost.
Like, we're from the government and we're here to help. kind of thing.
Exactly, because there were some rather large strings attached
Strings attached, yeah, like, pledging allegiance to the king.
to the king, and not just any king, but Henry VIII, the king who had just broken from the Catholic Church.
Right, and declared himself head of the Church of England.
Exact.
Talk about
Bit of a dilemma.
yeah, a dilemma for these Irish lords many of whom are devoutly Catholic.
Absolutely caught between, their loyalty to the crown and their religious beliefs.
Right, and I imagine, I mean, Henry's break from Rome, that's not just like a personal thing. That has massive implications for Ireland.
Oh, absolutely. It's a seismic shift in the religious landscape, adds a whole other layer of complexity to this already volatile situation.
Yeah, I bet that didn't exactly smooth things over, right?
Not exactly a recipe for trust building, you could say.
Right, right.
And, it sowed the seeds for further discontent, more resistance,
Of course, yeah.
really paved the way for even more tumultuous times.
Unintended consequences.
Classic case.
Yeah. And speaking of which, this is where we see the plantations themselves really start to, like, kick into high gear.
Right, because all of Henry VIII's policies, surrender and regrant, all of it's really setting the stage
It's like they were.
for these massive land grabs.
It's like they were setting the table for it,
Mm-hmm. Exactly. They were laying the groundwork for a complete transformation of who owns what in Ireland.
And one of the most, I guess, dramatic examples of this is the plantation of Munster,
Right.
this isn't just like shifting ownership a little bit. This is like reshaping the whole social and cultural landscape.
It really is social engineering on a grand scale.
Yeah.
I mean, after the Desmond rebellions, the crown sees this opportunity to not only punish the rebels, but to repopulate Munster
Right.
with loyal subjects.
English Protestant settlers.
Exactly. So they confiscated massive tracts of land.
Wow.
Carved them up into these huge estates.
It's like they're auctioning off Ireland.
Essentially. And these are offered to wealthy English undertakers
Undertakers, yeah.
who were not just expected to, be landowners, but to bring in tenants, establish towns, create these little Englands.
Little pocket of England.
Exactly.
Yeah, it sounds more like a hostile corporate takeover in a way.
In a way.
And I'm thinking, of course, of Sir Walter Raleigh,
Right.
who was one of these undertakers, gets this big chunk of land in Munster.
He did.
And of course, he's also the guy, and this is one of those weird twists of history,
I know, right?
who brings the potato to Ireland.
It's almost comical.
It's crazy.
This humble root vegetable
I know.
that becomes so synonymous with Irish identity,
Right.
brought over by an Englishman
Right.
who's part of a system designed to, displace the very people who are going to embrace it.
It's wild. I wonder if he had any clue.
Right.
What the legacy of that one little...
What he had unleashed?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Culinary and
The
cultural.
law of unintended consequences.
Exactly. But of course, like a lot of these grand schemes,
Right.
the plantation of Munster runs into problems,
It did.
despite their best efforts
Right.
to create this kind of Protestant, utopia.
Yeah.
They just can't totally escape the realities on the ground.
The Tories, as they were called.
Right, the displaced Irish.
Exactly. They resisted.
They weren't just going to take it, right?
No, they knew the land.
Yeah.
They had the local knowledge.
Right.
And they were determined to make life difficult for the newcomer.
Guerrilla warfare, Irish style.
If you will.
Yeah. They were fighting for their homes,
Absolutely.
their way of life.
Their very existence, really.
And on top of that, it's not like they had, just endless English settlers eager to pick up and move over there.
No, it was not the easiest sell.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
It's dangerous. It's unfamiliar.
Right, and it's a long way from home.
Exactly. So it's this constant
Yeah.
battle for control.
It's a trouble for control.
Right,
Yeah. And despite all the efforts to keep them separate,
right. The English and the Irish,
You can't totally erase that.
they start interacting, right.
They're living in close proximity.
Yeah.
They're influencing one another, blending in ways that I think, the architects of all this could never have imagined.
Right. You can't, even when you try to engineer things socially from the top down,
Right.
that human element is always going to find a way
To connect, to
Yeah.
adapt. Yeah.
to find a way. But of course, this clash, it boils over
It does.
into the 9 Years' War, which is one of the most significant conflicts, really, in Irish history.
It is.
And at the center of all this, you've got Hugh O'Neill,
Hugh O'Neill. Yes.
who is this Gaelic lord who says, no, we're not backing down.
A powerful figure.
Yeah.
He understood that the Gaelic Irish had to present this united front.
Right.
They were going to stand a chance against, this English expansion.
Yeah, he was sharp.
Oh, incredibly shrewd.
Playing this high stakes game,
Yeah. Well, yeah.
forging alliances, even reached out to like Catholic Spain for help.
He did. I mean, he was not afraid to play on English fears.
Right. He knew what he was doing.
Absolutely.
And for a while there, it seemed like he might actually pull it off.
Yeah. I mean, the 9 Years' War, it was brutal. It was costly.
Oh, yeah.
Victories on both sides.
Yeah.
But the Irish, I mean, under O'Neill's command, they had some really remarkable victories early on.
They did.
The Battle of the Yellow Ford.
Right. 1598.
Yes. Sent shockwaves through the English establishment.
Right, because it was this moment where it's like, okay, they're not just going to roll over.
Exactly. This is not a minor uprising. This is a war for the soul of Ireland.
It's a turning point in a lot of ways.
It really was.
But of course, the English, they don't give up easily either.
No, they were nothing if not persistent.
Right.
And they were willing to dedicate the resources to crushing this rebellion.
Yeah, I mean, they weren't messing around. And the tide really starts to turn. And then you have this really devastating battle at Kinsale in 1601.
Kinsale was a turning point, not just in the war,
Right.
but I think in the whole trajectory of Irish history.
Right. It was the beginning of the end, in a way, for this chapter.
In a way, yes.
And that's, that really sets the stage for, I think, one of the saddest moments, honestly, in this whole story.
It is.
The Flight of the Earls. So 1607, Hugh O'Neill,
Right.
Rory O'Donnell,
Yes.
and dozens of their followers.
Yeah.
They basically realize, okay, we can't hold out.
The writing's on the wall.
Yeah, they board ships and they leave Ireland.
They do.
I mean, that's just such a
heartbreaking.
Such a weighty decision. What was that have felt like?
The weight of that choice, the sense of loss, the uncertainty.
Yeah.
It was a defining moment.
It really was. And of course, the English crown sees this as an opportunity.
Right. A void has emerged.
Right. Let's really tighten our grip, especially on Ulster.
Especially Ulster, which had been, this hotbed of resistance.
Right.
And so this paves the way for the plantation of Ulster,
Right.
which is really the most extensive, the most systematic.
They took all the lessons.
Yes, they'd been practicing.
Right. Exactly. They're like, okay, this is the big one.
This is the culmination.
This is how we're gonna once and for all just make sure English dominance is here to stay.
Secure it.
Yeah. And they go all in on this.
Right.
This really meticulously planned out system.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Dividing up the land. You've got the undertakers who get these big estates.
Right.
The servitors who are often, soldiers, government officials.
Right. They're rewarding their guys.
Exactly. And then, of course, some land set aside for the native Irish.
Right. Right. A tiny
The
contingent.
least desirable, often.
Right. Of course.
But it's a hierarchy, right? It's designed to create a new social order.
Totally.
With English Protestants firmly in control.
This is how it's going to be from now on.
Right.
But as we've seen so many times already in this story, it doesn't go exactly according to plan.
There are always wrinkles.
There are wrinkles, and this one's a big one because they can't actually find enough English and Scottish settlers to fill all this land they've taken.
Yeah. They had a bit of a recruitment problem.
Yeah, and so they have to start relying on the very people they were trying to push out.
Right, the Irish.
Yeah, to work the land.
Exactly, which I think speaks to, again, this resilience.
The irony.
The irony that even when you try to write people out of the story,
they find a way.
They remain.
Right, exactly. But that, of course, has its own consequences.
Oh, absolutely.
Because it's not this clean break.
Right.
They wanted where it's like, okay, Protestants are in control and Catholics are marginalized.
Right. It's messier than that.
Much messier, yeah. And, I mean, you can't talk about the plantations without talking about Cromwell.
Right, because as if things weren't tumultuous enough already.
Right, exactly. It's like, Ireland's had a rough go, and then Cromwell's like, hold my beer.
Exactly. 1649, he arrives.
Yeah.
And he is not known for his subtlety.
No, not a subtle guy.
Driven by this potent mix of religious zeal, military ambition. I mean, he really unleashes this reign of terror on Ireland.
That's a brutal, brutal chapter.
Drogheda, Wexford. I mean, these are dark, dark events.
Those massacres, they're just they're just awful. And
Yeah.
and it's hard to, I think, overstate
Right.
how much damage.
Yeah, the lasting trauma.
The trauma, yeah.
Inflicted on Ireland.
Absolutely. And I mean, systematically confiscating even more land.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is systematic.
Shipping people off to the West Indies.
Indentured servitude.
It's brutal. By 1700, you've got 10% of the land.
Staggering.
In Catholic hands.
A complete, almost total,
so unbelievable.
Yeah, reversal of the traditional landowning class.
Right. We started this whole conversation. It was like this patchwork.
Right. Different systems of governance, land ownership.
Right. And now it's like
right.
a tiny, tiny minority.
Yeah, English and Protestant, largely.
Controlling everything.
Holding the reins of power.
And that's the legacy of the plantations.
It is. It is. And it's a legacy that continues to, echo, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Through Irish history, through Irish society,
It's everything. It's the land ownership patterns.
It's politics.
Yeah, the politics, cultural identity.
It's all there.
It's all connected.
And it's a reminder that, land, power, identity, these are not just abstract concepts.
They're intertwined.
They are, and they have very real, very human consequences.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that's about as heavy as we get probably for one of these deep dives. But I mean, it's such a I don't know, it's such a powerful and in a lot of ways really sad story.
It is a sad story
about, ambition, power, unintended consequences.
Absolutely. The resilience of the human spirit in the face of incredible odds.
And also just this reminder that history, it's not just dates and names.
No, these are real lives.
It's real people.
Real people making choices, facing consequences.
And sometimes it's a potato.
Sometimes it is.
That ends up, representing something much bigger.
A symbol of resistance, of resilience.